Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
Psalm 137 in your Holy Bibles. It is first of all, it is a psalm. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. This psalm is recited every day, multiple times theoretically.
Really?
Yeah, it's for Birkat Hamazon when it's not Shabbat or Chagim. Yeah, it's very. I've never been in a situation where it was actually done. Because usually, if it's a weekday type of a thing, you want to bench, you don't want to linger, by, what shall we say, overloading the message. So, but it is in many Sidurim, and yeah. I'm not sure I understand why, because it's not, it's positive in terms of remembering Zion, and that may be the reason, but that also comes from it. It's got a depressing side to it, as we will see, quite understandably also. All right, so Rabbi Siegel in his commentary titles it Experiencing Exile. And indeed, I have to agree with 100%. The psalm was, you'll see there are references in here that I think make it pretty clear, actually, about the timing of it. But it was written by someone who was in exile in Babylonia after the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 or thereabouts, 590. Remember, there were two groups of exiles, 597 and then 586. So it's difficult to know which ones, this is, but it was definitely written in exile. So that is clear. And so we will begin. I divide it up into three parts. He does too, but we disagree over one verse because I think there's a structure that he sort of overlooked. And I can make a case for my thing, and I'm sure he can make a case for his. But I'm not going to get into an argument about it. All right, the pain of exile for recent arrivals begins in chat with part 1, verse 1. So Al Naharot Bavel Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu B'Zochrenu Et Zion. By the rivers of Babylon there we sat down, and yes, we wept as we remembered Zion. Okay? So as you will see later on, remembering is a major theme in the psalm. Okay? And this passage actually is a Vorspeise of part 2 of the psalm, which we will get to shortly. All right, but the key word is Zachrenu, to remember. All right? So keep that under your hats. So on the rivers of Babylon, we know, for example, there's another instance of an Israelite in Babylonia by a body of water, specifically. And that's Ezekiel chapter 1. He's at the Kavar Canal. Okay? And where that is, I'm not sure, but it's a geographic site. Here, it doesn't say which rivers. Are they canals? Are they rivers? We do not know. But it's clearly, he's speaking now in what happened already, right? We remembered, we cried, we sat, we cried, and we remembered. So this has happened, and he's looking back at it from his perspective as he's writing the poem, and he now gives us more details. Al aravim b'tocha kalinu kinorotenu, right? Upon the poplar trees in her midst, we hung up our lyres. Okay, so this group of people have instruments. It's not singular. It's not I did. It's we. And so this leads us to suggest what about these people? Who might they be? I mean, they're Israelites. But if it's a group of people...
Couldn't it be priests?
Who?
Levites?
Levites. Leviim, yes. It's very likely, it could be, because, a group of people with instruments. And next week, by the way, we will definitely be reading Psalm 150, which is the culminating psalm of the book, and you want to talk about instruments, there we're going to talk about a lot of things of which I know absolutely nothing. So I'm going to have to totally depend upon the commentators and the lexicons to explain what that's going to be. But anyway, musical instruments were part of the activity of the Levites. Remember, they had orchestras and they had choirs that sang during the officiating of the priests. This has led many scholars to suggest, in the absence of any written words, you can go through the Bible, and if I have to, other than the Birkat Kohanim, what words did the priests recite in the first temple? You won't find them. Nothing. Now, the Levites are associated historically with the chanting, the singing of psalms and musical instruments, musical accompaniment. The psalms say that. Okay? But what do the priests say? So it is assumed, since there's no priestly liturgy, it's assumed that they didn't say anything, that the actual sacrificing ritual was accompanied by no words. And that may be the reason why the Levites and had their instruments and were singing songs of praise of God. I don't believe that they would sing something like this, right? But definitely lots of psalms talk about God the King, God the Great, and so forth and so on. So I think that's I accept that as what is sort of the regnant understanding of that. By the way, in the second temple, where in Mishnah Tamid, we read of this is late Second Temple, that there were actually opportunities during the day where the priests would gather in a special room for themselves. The priests who presumably were at that time not working the altars, that they would gather and pray. And there was a small liturgy that they prayed, and it's listed in this Mishnah in Tamid. And one wonders, how would a rabbinic source that was compiled in 200 actually have such a detailed accounting of praying in the temple during its standing, prior to the destruction in 70? All right, and so it's a very interesting thing. And when you look at it, I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now. We don't have time. But if you read that, you will see that there are elements of it that are reflected in the sequence of prayer that developed after the temple was destroyed. And they look upon this room as like their own little synagogue. Nowhere is it called a synagogue. But they apparently there were fixed prayers for them. It's very interesting, actually. But about First Temple, nothing. Leon, did you want to say something?
No. I was no. The only thing that I could say is the fact that my translation has Neharot translated into channels or streams, because Babel is built with a lot of such waterways.
Yes, it could be rivers. Right. Well, as I said, it could be canals. It could be rivers. Right. Yes. No, there's no question. I mean, it's in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. A lot of water there. Right. And that way the flood stories came from there, because it flooded. That was the Jordan River was not a source of floods, not during the biblical period. Maybe 7,000 years earlier it was, but not at that particular point in time. So, it's hard to believe that Noah, he floated his ark on the Jordan River. I don't think so. Anyway, all right, moving on. But understand something. We already know that the lyres were hung on these trees, right? But now the question is, why did they hang them up? Next line, Ki sham she'elunu shovenu divrei shir, v'tolalenu simcha shiru lanu mishir Tzion. Because our captors demanded of us words of song, and those who mocked us said, sing us some songs of Zion. And that's why they hung up their lyres. The key is the explaining why they hung up their lyres. They refused to sing. And that comes out in the next line. Eich nashir et shir Adonai al admat nechar. How can we sing songs of God on a foreign land? I mean, they're Levites. All they know are songs of God. They don't know the top 10 in the rock and roll listing that year. All right, so they refused. We're not going to sing God's songs here. Go ahead.
Is there assumption that they were hiding them and not just hanging the leaves or something, so they wouldn't even be seen?
It doesn't say that, so I can't argue. I can't argue that with you.
So they hung them up. It sounded to me.
I don't know. What a poplar tree looks like. It could be, but on the other hand, they may have done it and you stuck their nose. They're like this to their oppressors. What are you going to do more? You're going to beat us up because we don't sing? All right, beat us up, Barbara.
What they don't want us. The Levites didn't want to sing songs of God or to God on alien soil. What would they feel like now when the majority of Jews are not are on alien soil? We're not in Jerusalem. We're not in Israel soil. What would they think about it? That we do sing
I can't. God. I don't know. I mean, exile, the diaspora, is part of Jewish life for 2,000 years now. And, opinions and views shift. And Levium, I mean, they do, priests, Kohanim, do the priestly blessing in a synagogue, right? And nobody, of course, they're expected to. They're supposed to. So I can't, by now, all the rules have changed being in diaspora. So, of course, I would assume Levites today in this rule would have no problem. Now, if they were being persecuted and taken off to a concentration camp, and the people in the camp said, sing some of your stupid songs, then they would perhaps say no. I don't know, depending upon how much of a beating they wanted to take. Here, the impression that one gets is that they were obstinate and they said no.
Although the Jews in the camps actually prayed to God there. They did it surreptitiously. I even have a book which is
I don't know that they may have sang. They may have used Tehillim. It's very possible.
Well, I actually have.
Remember. When this poem was written, the book of Psalms did not exist. It was in process, right? These compilations were not complete.
Yeah.
Now the songs, I would say, yes, clearly some of them were, because they talk about songs that they have, right? So there was some compilation of things that they sang in the first temple, daily psalms, whatever they were. Okay. But it's hard for us to determine, what this was. But all I want to deal with, though, is the existential moment and what they are doing. And I want to suggest that this was an act of stubborn rebelliousness, if you will, on their part, saying, no, we're not going to do it. And the key word here is the Hebrew word ki, right? Everything that shows that it was a reaction to their request. And they said no. There's a lot of wordplay here, though. It's really interesting. And in that line, that verse 3 in particular, gets a whole load of it. But let's go back up to verse 2. Talim.
Rabbi, may I ask something quickly?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, I'm sorry.
I have the JPS 1917,
Yeah.
And that translation calls them willows.
I would look, the Hebrew wording of things like flowers, trees, etc., has become much more precise in the latter part of the 20th and early 21st century than it was in 1917. And I'm following both the modern JPS and Siegel. Both of them agreed that it's poplars. Okay, like everybody thought a Shoshana was a rose. It's not a rose. Okay, it's another kind of flower. So I would say the Tybal, in this instance, the later word is probably the more accurate one. The understanding of Hebrew has grown, tremendously in the last century. All right. And that I'm going to ask somebody right now who knows Hebrew very well, Vered, to further elaborate. Go ahead.
Okay. So talking about Pasuk Bet, what Table said, Aravim, there is a very well-known tree called Arava Habochia, the willow tree in English.
Yes.
So probably that's the reference to this one, that they were hanging their kinorot, the violins, in an act of kind of rebellion. No, we're not going here. We're hanging it. We're not going to use it.
Yes.
Because we are on Admat Nechar.
Right. But I think, you're right in that the traditional meaning of an arava is a willow. But it could very well be, and I don't know if a poplar is related to a willow, but the Arava willow is Eretz Yisrael. This is Bavel. So it may mean that it's a cousin of it. I don't know but
maybe a cousin. We have to ask a botanist, but it's probably related to this one.
I would say so. Yes, I would say so. Yeah. All right. Anyhow, so Talinu. Now, if you will look in verse 3, in the beginning of the second piece of that, tolalenu, right? Mockers, to mock, is the verb talal. It means to mock. But listen, tolalenu, talinu, right? So it's as if we hung up our kinorot, we hung up talinu at our kinorot, because of what the Tolalim were doing to us, right? They hung it up in response to the mocking. The word hanging and mocking are in apposition here. Do you get what I'm saying? Hung it up because they mocked. That's our way of dealing with it. That's why I think it was a kind of an act of rebelling. Yeah, Vered.
A little comment about Tolalenu, that actually it's the only place that we have in the whole Bible that we have this word as a verb, and nobody knows exactly what it is. You can say that it's to mock if you look at it in the Shoresh Talal, but you can also say that the Shoresh is Yalal, that they were...
Yalal is to
Yes.
But that would not bring a taf.
That would not bring what?
The letter taf.
It will if you put it in Hefil, but we're not going to argue. Yeah. We're going to talk. If you want to see relationship between Talinu and Tolalenu, the sound is maybe the same, but the meaning is different.
Yeah, of course the meaning is different. 1 second, hold on. I want to look up something. You raised a very good point. Okay. Here is my concordance. Right?
Okay.
Yes. And it would be very interesting to see how they deal with it. Because I looked in the KB, my diction, my lexicon, and they're the ones who came up with the notion of mocking. Here it is.
Yes, it is. Taf lamed lamed is to mock.
Yeah, exactly. And so here, this is all the verbal form. Wait a minute, I got to go back. Wait a minute. 1 minute. Oh boy. Oh, here we come.
You know, Malvin translates it, כמו שוללינו בחילוף תו בשין.
נכון, that's another possibility. Yeah, it's another possibility.
Malvin, ביור המילות.
Because nobody knows actually what tolaleinu is. So you can come up maybe with 3 options, like 3 answers.
Could be.
What's tolaleinu? You can say mockers.
Right. The word tolal, I'm looking in the concordance. The only place where you find it, the concordance says sholel bozez.
Right.
That's to
and
mock.
It's not to mock. It's
to make fun of.
To make fun of, like to mock.
Yeah, exactly. So that means these 2 sources that I'm using agree on that.
I'm trying to guess here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I say.
That would not but then there's no reason why the taf would be there.
Well, the taf is part of the conjugation, you know.
Nachon.
Yeah,
okay.
But they wouldn't see, because what follows after is what they were saying. So they were mocking with words, right?
Yeah.
Choice. Shiru lanu mishirei tzion. That's not yililut, yililah. That is actual verbiage, which would go along with somebody making fun of somebody, mocking. But
if you talk about Yalal, then you can say that when the Babylonian came, we all were crying. So
but again, context. You got to think of the text in which it's found. Anyway, but thank you. But I think I want to thank you because you are you're right in the sense this is a hapax legomenon.
It is.
It's the only place in the Bible where that word is used in a more noun form, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who mock. It's a noun. And
by the way, Alter quotes Meyer Gruber.
Yeah.
That is a play on word on talinu.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Which makes sense as well.
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, regardless of how we understand it, the form that it takes is to make a linkage. I'll repeat what I said before. The hanging is a result of the tolalim. Because they were tolalim, their answer was, oh, hang it. We're going to hang it.
So Shoveinu can be Tolaleinu if you look at it from...
Yes, yeah, that's right, exactly, right. And so Shoveinu, of course, means our captors, the people who brought us into Shavu.
Our captors and our mockers, people who are mocking us.
Exactly, yeah, right. But here in that verse though, the second thing, listen. Sham she'alunu shovenu divrei shir. Sham shovenu shir. Simcha shiru lanu mishir tzion. All right? You've got 6 sheens and a sin in one verse.
Wow.
It's like, I'm not sure what the sh sound was, but it's got a lot of sh to it, doesn't it?
Oh.
Yeah, that's got to be.
And if we take Tolaleinu as Sholaleinu, we have an extra shin.
That's like you've said to us before, and one of the things that when I first started learning Hebrew, that it struck me like the endings for a whole sentence would be chuz or oats. And we got shushes here. It's like you said before a few times that it's poetic.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but it's done intentionally. And I'm going to assume
always done intentionally.
That this whole thing was set up in a way to leave us with a certain impact of either this was a sign of their abusiveness, or it's just to show how stupid they were, that they were just making sounds that were meaningless. I don't know. All right. But their response is, right? We can't sing the songs of God on a foreign soil, right? And again, I'm assuming that means, since they're probably Levites, that they knew, they knew Tehillim, which are Psalms of praise of God, and they didn't know the popular music of the day. And the fact that the Babylonians wanted to sing that as if they were singing some pop song, it meant that they were demeaning their religious culture. And that would be a real slap in their face. So it's nasty stuff. Okay. All right. And you think about it for a moment. Why? This is total speculation on my part. All right. But clearly there is pain in the words of these people, assuming they are priests. And you've got to keep in mind that many of the instances when the choirs and the symphony orchestras were together were these great pageants in the temple, right? Major holy days, maybe during even with the normal functioning of the priests. But it was their music, their words, their choral music, and their music, instrumental music, was intended to bring glory and pageantry to the sacrificial offerings, right? It's all part of a great, powerful moment. And here they are being demeaned by these bunch of bovans who are trying to make fun of them by taking their instruments and the seriousness and the glorious nature of what they sing and basically rubbing it in their faces. And that's probably how they felt. Okay. All right. Now,
wait, Rabbi, what is a bovan?
A bovan. How would you define a big guy who thinks he's tough?
Like an oaf?
No, an oaf. No, an
oaf is actually good. A bovan is a kind of a big oaf.
Yeah, but I think a bovan has got more focused intention than an oaf. I don't know. It could be. It's possible. Yeah, but it's this big guy. Hey, what do you think you're doing? That kind of guy. All right. An big unseemly person who likes to throw his weight around, something like that. Okay. All right. Now, so I think that what we're seeing here in all of this is what happened when they first got into the country, right? And now he's elsewhere because remember, it's all past tense, except the last line, which they said, that's what they said. It's a quotation, but it's all that happened. Now he's resituated somewhere in Babylonia, maybe in this capital city. We don't know where he is. And we don't know exactly, but we know that what those things were sung by rivers, right? Wherever there are rivers or canals, that incident happened on a river. Okay, now rivers can flow through cities, or the city could be, a few kilometers away from the river, whatever. We don't know exactly where they are, but he's somewhere else when he's writing this. And that's important to keep in mind because he's reviewing the past. But now, look where he's going to go. All right? Suddenly he's going to switch now. And remembering, him telling what he just said, dealing with the songs of Zion, right? Right? He talks, Shirei, right? What does it say? Shir Adonai, excuse me. It doesn't talk Zion, but he's thinking about all these things. So Tzion comes into his head. And now, part 2 is remembering Zion. That's the next stage, okay? I want you to keep in mind, though, I'm going to lay this out right now, that in verses 5 and 6, this opens up, it lays out a chiasm, one of my dear old friends, right? The chiasm. Okay, so, and the chiasm actually ends in verse 7. All right, look, and here's the chiasm. We'll talk about the meaning of the words in a minute. There you see Yerushalayim, right? So let that be A. Then in verse 6, Tidbak lashoni lechiki imlo eskarechi, zachar, zocher, remember. That's B. All right? Imlo a'ala et Yerushalayim again. So I would say that I'm calling XA, right? It's the middle point, but it's a repetition. All right? But then in verse 7, you have Zachor Adonai, Zachor, that's B prime, and then again Yerushalayim A prime. So you have A, B, X, A, B prime, A prime, a structure. Okay, and that's why I think that verse 7, which Rabbi Siegel walks on to the next lines, is where it is, and I think I can explain why it's there. But I'm going to argue that the structure that I just pointed out brings all three of these verses together into one statement. And I'll explain why now. Okay. So he begins with a positive, He's got these visions of Jerusalem. He's remembering. And now he's saying, I must never forget this. Implied here. I cannot forget Jerusalem. Okay, and you think about it. The guy's a Levite. If he's a Levite, this is where he lived, right? Because by the time of the destruction, Jerusalem was the only temple they had. So this was the place. This was the place where God's presence rested on earth. And he had the honor, the Levites had the honor of working there and serving God. Okay? So, right? If I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right arm lose its cunning, lose its power, let it wither.
Why it seems to me like you've got Shin Kaf Het, and one is forget and the other is wither, but they're the same word. So
No, Tishkach means forget also. It means may my right.
You will forget.
Yeah,
it will forget.
Yeah.
My right hand will be forgotten.
Okay, that's what it sounded like to me. Okay, good. Thank you.
No, it is forgot.
It says wither. They translate it as wither. It seems like
it does.
It'll be forgotten.
It means it forgot its strength. It's a metaphoric use.
Okay.
It means to forget, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Forgot its strength.
Thank you. I feel better.
Yeah, no, but it's right. It means it's forgetting. The word forgetting is mentioned twice. Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So if I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its strength. Okay. All right. Right hand is always the sign of strength in the Jewish tradition. Any lefties in the house? Aha! I knew it. You sneaky guy. I could tell all along. No.
Yeah, everybody was right-handed back in those days. Left-handed was supposed to be like not good.
No.
I mean, not now, but way back when.
No, right hand, strength.
No, but what he's saying is back in the day, a lefty was supposed to be a bad thing, a bad person, or a witch almost.
Yes, exactly. I'm saying it. I'm agreeing with that. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you weren't. Okay.
No.
Rabbi?
Yeah. Go ahead, Barrett.
I want to look at Tishkach Yemini and Tidbak Leshoni, and the next one.
Yes.
For them being Levites, so he will not be able to play the violin, neither will he be able to sing.
Bingo.
Because he will be mute. I mean, he kind of make an oath here.
Yes.
And because of that, I won't be able to play my violin, neither will I be able to sing Song of Zion, because it's like an oath. If I will forget you, then that's what it will be.
Did you read my notes?
I don't, but I have my own notes in my head.
Yeah, because that's exactly what I read down.
Oh, okay.
We did not talk about this, right?
Good one, Vered.
You testify, you atzocheret, right? Bli neder.
Bli neder.
Lo sochachnu al zeh bichlal.
No, we did not.
We did not talk about this at all. We reached the same conclusion. Therefore, it must be correct. Okay. Moving on. No, that's right. Exactly. No, it's absolutely correct. Right? And again, and here, now notice here, the remembering continued. The concept of remembering pops up in 6, right? Right. So you have imesh kachech. If I forget, that's in other words, an active thing on his heart, on his part. Lo es kareni, I will not remember. Lo es karechi, I will not remember you. Right. So he's got it coming and going, forgetting and not remembering. So he's got. It's a powerful statement. How if he is to retain any sense of his Levitical skill and what his raison d'etre in life is, he can never forget Jerusalem. And he's cursing himself, basically.
Right.
He's cursing himself to demonstrate how powerful his remembering Jerusalem is. Okay, and we'll talk about this in a little bit as to what this might compare to, all right, that some of us may be more familiar with. All right, so that's 6. Okay, now, verse 7. All right, hold on just a second. All right, now, I want to suggest something here, and this is now I'm moving into this area of a historical guess, which really could be totally wrong. All right. Now, so suddenly he thinks about remembering Jerusalem. So it could come out of the recollection that he had about how horrific it was when they first came into the country. And now things have quieted down because we know from, for example, the book of Ezekiel, which was written in Bavel, that they operated there as a kind of a community. The Babylonians did not shut them down. And in fact, we read at the end of the Bible, I think it's in Sefer Divrei Yamim, that the King Jehoiakim, who was sent into exile in 597, ended up eating at the table of the king of Babylonia. Right? King Jehoiakim was not the last king. Tzidkiyahu was. There was another one in between. Jehoiakim was the king who was taken into exile, kept in captivity, as a captive, but then released, and he ate at the table of the king of Babylonia. All right, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. All right, however, I'll talk about the Persians, because they are now coming into play. And I want to suggest that this psalm could have been written, and let's skip ahead for a second. Look at verse 7. What does it say? No, sorry, verse 8. Skip down to verse 8 for a moment. What does it say?
Bat Bavel Ashduda.
Right. The city of Babylonia that has been laid to ruins.
Maybe a sign of Koresh that is going to come and destroy.
Hold on. He's saying that Babylon lies in ruins, meaning what has happened? This must have been sometime after 539 when the Persians conquered Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, why would he say it's lying in ruins? Right. And he makes a point afterwards about another thing that's even worse, which we'll get to. Don't want to talk about it now. All right, so I'm going to work on the assumption now that the place where he's no longer by the rivers. He is now living somewhere near the capital, Babylon, which he knows is in ruins. He has seen it. He has witnessed it. Right? He's right there. And this will explain something that pops up even before this. Sure. And what was the policy of the Persians with regard to countries that they had conquered, with respect to temples. Yes, title.
They let them be. We know that from Megillas Esther, right?
We know it from what?
From Megillas Esther, where all the different provinces or whatever were allowed.
It doesn't say. That's later on, right? They allowed the communities to be there, but didn't happen under Cyrus. That's presumed to be much later on, and we don't know how historic the book is anyway. But the point is, the Jews, what you're saying, the Jews were living there, but it has no mention of the temple in the book of Esther, right? There's no mention of the temple. There's mention of toleration of the Jews, yes, right. That happened as well. I'm going back before that, though. Immediately after the conquest, and we know about this, ironically, from the Cyrus cylinder. It's a cylindrical-shaped piece of stone on which is written an agreement, a statement by the king Cyrus to Babylon, to the city of Babylon, the very self-same city, that they are entitled to rebuild their temple. The wording is very similar to the wording that you find in the book of Ezra when it repeats in Aramaic and in Hebrew a similar letter that our Ezra brought. And when it's not Ezra. Prior to that time, when a group of Israelites came back to Jerusalem with a letter from the king saying you can build the temple.
Right.
And that apparently was the policy of the Persians. Now, let me finish. I see your hand, Gabriela.
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm gonna fly this little kite on this balloon now. Are you ready? Okay. I have an idea. I'm just wondering if this Levite didn't hear about that policy, especially if he's living in Babylonia, not far from the city. He may have heard that even though the city was destroyed, they got a privilege to rebuild their temple.
Mm-hmm.
And that was policy. And he starts thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great?
We could do it too.
If our temple could be rebuilt also. Wow. And so now he starts remembering Jerusalem.
Mm.
And I'm wondering if that policy on the part of the Persians is what sparked this memory.
Mm.
Possible. I can't prove it. No documentary evidence.
Makes sense, though.
Yeah, it does make sense. I just wanted to say that I believe that scroll you mentioned was, I believe that was exhibited in the Getty Villa at one time.
Oh, the cylinder.
The cylinder, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's nothing new. It's been around for a long for decades.
Isn't it at the British Museum?
Huh?
Isn't the Cyrus cylinder at the British Museum?
That's where it's kept now? And it could be. It could be. I don't know. It may be. I mean, these things are all over the place. In the latest Biblical Archaeology Review, there's a statement about the facade of the gates of Nebuchadnezzar's summer temple in Babylon.
Mm.
All right, which is in the museum in Berlin. We saw it 3 or 4 times because every time friends would come in, we take them to see Nebuchadnezzar's temple. Palace.
Yeah, the Pergamon.
It is in the British Museum, and I remember reading it or trying to.
It was in the
British Museum.
The cylinder is in the British Museum. Yeah. All right, good. Okay, so you and Ty agree. I agree. Fine. All right. Anyway, so I'm just wondering if this is what it was. And he perhaps anticipated that the same thing conceivably could happen to the Jews. And according to biblical tradition, and the point some scholars say, but in that document there's no mention of anybody else. He mentions a few other countries in that, but it's specifically aimed at Babylonia. And the fact that he says, but it doesn't mention Jerusalem. Well, the point of the deal is that by that point, I mean, relative to them, some of these countries, what was Jerusalem? I mean, let's be honest, folks. It was a little tiny country down there. And it probably was not on number one on his list in terms of strategic placement. It took over 100 years for the Persian Empire to recognize Jerusalem as a serious city that could be, because of its location, and this is under Ezra and Nehemiah, 450 or thereabouts, that they rebuilt the walls, gave it the status as an official city, and the law of Torah became Persian law for the Jews. It was a total upgrade of the city. And that's because they began to worry about who's in the south, what enemy, which actually they conquered for a while, Egypt.
That's right.
So Jerusalem becomes a major fortification on the road. It's not on the road, but you go down the mountain from there. You're either at the coastal road or the desert road, the Jordan River Valley road, and you can cut them off at the pass, right? So they were the Persians elevated that city into a significant thing. At the time after the destruction, it was, for Israel, of course, for Judah, big deal, Solomon's temple, which was probably very lovely. But the point is, it wasn't a major factor back then. They hadn't begun really to conquer much in Egypt yet. That happened afterwards. So the southern border was not so significant. But it's maybe that look, we know that the guys one of the people who brought back that letter was Zerubbabel, who was a relative. He was from the royal family. And he brought status with him. Okay? And some Bible scholars suggest suddenly he disappears from the scene. Some of the later prophets mention him as a quasi-messianic Davidic personality, because he's from the line of David. And if that was true, guess what the Persians would have done?
Oh, yeah.
Last thing they need is a royalist revolution in Jerusalem after letting him build a temple, blah, blah, blah. Right? So it's possible that they either did that or just told him, would you please kindly step down from your position of authority and leadership? We don't want to see you anymore.
What is the relationship of that with the Bible that they had with the Greeks?
At that point, in the 6th century?
Not 6th century. Aren't we talking a little bit further? Yeah.
No. 500. I'm talking in the 500s.
Later. That's much later.
Yes.
Much later.
Yeah, centuries later. Sure. Oh, yeah.
Much later.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so that's my surprise, everybody. All right. So now let's go back again. And so what does he say? Let's see. Did we cover it all? Yeah. All right. So let's look at the wording. Okay. So what he's saying is, it's not only remembering, but verse 6, I have to elevate Jerusalem at the top of my joy. Right? That means he anticipates, he's excited about this, and he's saying, I'm going to, how can he bring it to the top of his joy if he's in Babylonia still? Well, the way that might happen is if they, in fact, decide to build a temple and let him go back to Jerusalem. And it may be that groups had already begun to go. Nobody knows the timetable. We know that there were different waves of returning exiles. We know that. But what the timing was, not clear. We do know that the permission to build was issued in 538 by Cyrus, a year after they conquered.
Cyrus is Koresh.
Koresh.
Cyrus is Koresh.
Koresh, right.
Koresh. Yeah, Koresh. Yeah, of course. Or Kurush.
Kurush.
In Persian, yes. Anyhow, yeah, so in 538 that began. But when was the temple finished? Under Darius in 515, right? Took over 20 years for the temple to be built because the natives around the area were not so cooperative. They would send in raiding parties to the city that did not have a strong wall, loot parts of it, and they would interfere with the efforts to rebuild the temple, interjecting themselves into the relationship between this Jewish community and the Persians, and foment all kinds of tension. And so it was delayed over 20 years. Finally, Darius was reminded of the promise, and he made sure it was built. Okay, he helped. All right. So, but this guy is thinking about that and hoping that in some fashion he can have enough joy to really elevate Jerusalem to the place where it needs to be in his consciousness. All right. So now, verse 7. Now, so as I say, some people relate this to verse 8, which deals with the Babylonians and a curse on the Babylonians, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to suggest no. I'm going to suggest that this is actually meant to be this Levite had a strong sense of the need for revenge of Israel's enemies. He wanted them taken care of. He didn't want them to get off the hook. Okay, he wanted them done in. So now he's saying, listen, God, now he's turning to God. Dear God, remember the Edomites and the day of Jerusalem. What's Yom Yerushalayim? Interesting. Today, Yom Yerushalayim is a day when we remember the city was freed. Back then, what was Yom Yerushalayim? The day
of destruction.
Exactly, when it fell. Right. Mm-hmm. And why Edom? Because they actually, at a certain point, joined in with the Babylonians to get their archenemy. The history of the relations between Israelites and later Jews and the Edomim, or Idumeans as they were called later by the Greeks, was it was a pendulum, very often strained. The Edomim would, when they were still Edomim, would take parts of the south eastern part of Judah, literally take land. They ended up after the destruction after the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, they actually ended up living in Hebron. They were a weakened group, but they lived in Hebron. There was an area, an Edomi area in Hebron. All right, and they went back and forth. Who finally shut them down?
Wasn't the Jews?
Yeah, the Maccabee, the Hasmonean kings.
Right.
What's his? Not Yanai.
Hasmoneans.
Hyrcanus. Oh, come on. What's his? I can't remember right now.
Herod. Wasn't that Horus?
Who? No.
Herod.
He's a product. Herod is a product of what the Maccabees did.
Right.
It was the king who lived around 135. Darn it, I can't remember his name right now. Anyhow, he conquered the Idumeans and he forcibly circumcised them.
I understand that they converted, but then they became very loyal after that.
Yeah, well, there's an argument as to whether they agreed to circumcision and conversion or whether it was forced upon them. It's not clear. But yes, under this king, they became Jewish. And hence you have Herod is the end result of that, whose Jewishness was not so important to him. All right. I mean,
All right.
The guy built a beautiful temple. There's no question about it for his Jewish people. He did. And he was the king over the area of Judah and some other areas in the north, no question. But it's the same thing. This guy built up Caesarea and other areas that were made the Romans happy. So he was a real politician. And he, like King Solomon, had an edifice complex.
So I think you're talking about
yes. We are accused of that. Jews are accused of that.
We have an edifice. We build and build and build and
build. But not, I think he killed a few people in his family.
Oh yeah,
his wife and his sons.
If my memory serves.
Yes, right. All right. Wait, I got Tybal and then Leon.
Well, I was about to say it's a genealogy thing that. Supposedly because Herod was descended from Idumean converts. Those were his grandparents, and he did not think that was so illustrious. That's why he had all the genealogies that had been in the temple destroyed.
Well, it was also, it was probably, it could have been that, that's possible, but it was also a way of just negating any competition. Because up until him, the high priest had quite a powerful force, was a powerful force there. And remember, the Maccabees were the priests. They took over from the Zadokites as being the priests. And by the time he came along, they had been in power, and they were now kings. They were priest kings. Okay? And so, when he was able to move into power, he wanted to shut that down completely because it would be a challenge to his authority. So, I'm sure he did not feel uncomfortable doing it because a lot of the people whom he killed in his family, in his court, were Maccabeans, descendants of the Mac Jews. Okay, so he did not love his foster people, if you will. Okay, but he was a politician also. And remember, the Talmud says that, if you haven't seen Herod's temple, then you haven't seen the most beautiful building in the world. And if you read Josephus, you realize it was a very impressive temple. And you can see it. You go to the model of Jerusalem. And more archaeology has proven that what Josephus writes about that is accurate. Pretty. The guy really, he hit it pretty well. Absolutely.
He built Masada, right?
Yeah, sure. Exactly. Did a heck of an engineering job there, too.
Amazing.
All right, Leon.
I was going to say that according to my quick search, it was Antipater who was the one you're looking for. He was an Idumean
that was Herod's father, was Antipater.
Correct. And he was selected by Hyrcanus II.
You're right. And that's what I was thinking. Yochanan Hyrcanus was the guy. Thank you. It was the second was the other guy. Yeah, the later one. Yochanan Hyrcanus was the guy who forced them to convert.
Right.
Converted them. Yeah, exactly. Right. See, it's interesting. His name was Yochanan Hyrcanus. He kept Yochanan, right? The next guy was Aristobulus. Where's the Jewish name? It sort of
disappeared.
Yeah.
All the people who rebelled against the Syrians.
These are the Maccabees, our great heroes, right? They ended up being like petty Greco-Roman kings,
Well,
they killed each other too.
Well, military people are not necessarily good governors later on.
Well,
these were priests.
Well, it shows you the notion of the corruption of power. It happens everywhere. Same thing there. I'll never forget, just a little semi-humorous note. In 1973, my professor, that's before the war, right? in the winter of 73, I was teaching at UCLA. Had not gotten my doctorate yet, but my professor Amos Funkenstein, alav shalom, was on sabbatical, and he asked me to teach his two-quarter survey of Jewish history, 2 10-week quarters. I had to teach from the beginning of the biblical period down till 1973.
Wow.
In 2 quarters.
Whoa.
Whoa, right. All right. Anyhow, so I got to the Maccabees, and I'm teaching history. I'm not teaching propaganda. I'm not teaching, hero worship or anything. I'm just calling it like you see it, as they say, right? And I was teaching the class, that ultimately the Maccabean, the Maccabean family ultimately ended up playing the political game on behalf of their people, to be sure. But at the same time, they were looking like all the other little petty kingdoms in the Middle East under the rule of the broader rule of the Greeks, right? The Romans had just begun to step in at the end there. And, they did the same thing like all these other guys did. And that's what's recorded in the history of the times. So I had about, and that was in the first semester, the first quarter. That was the winter quarter. So I had 180 students, and the hall was filled. It was the largest class in the history of Jewish studies at UCLA, only surpassed by the following quarter when I began with 250 students.
Wow.
It wasn't me. They didn't know me from a hole in the wall. But Amos, God bless him, was not a very good undergraduate teacher. And he just didn't know how to handle them. So he was very pleased that I had a little bit more experience in these matters, did it. And it worked. That's okay. It worked fine. All right. Anyhow. So anyway, I'm talking about this. There were people who could enroll in the class for credit through the extension. You pay it and you take the tests, you can get academic credit. And there was this lady in the back, a Jewish grandmother. Okay? I'm looking around the room. One of our peers, I don't know how old she was, all right? And she stood up and she says, "What? You're destroying all of these great Jewish heroes? I'm walking out." And she left. And I never saw her again.
Oh, yeah.
All right, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Let's move on. Okay, anyway. All right. So, I'm thinking that this verse 7 was written by the guy in Babylonia. He mentioned Jerusalem, and now he is thinking about what had happened there, and he remembers that the Edomites had actually violated a covenant that they made with the leadership in Jerusalem, and they turned against them because they saw that the Babylonians were too powerful. And so he said, "Please, God, do something to deal with these Edomites who said, Aru, Aru, Ad HaYesod Ba." All right, Aru, the verb comes from, really it means in Hebrew, ayin, resh, hey, it means to expose.
That's true.
Yes, it means, so here they translate it as to strip her or raise her. I'm saying it means to expose Jerusalem until the foundation, right?
Yes.
You cover everything. In other words, take it away. All you're left with is the yesod, are the foundations of the buildings. That's what they said while the city was being conquered. Destroy it, take away, destroy the buildings. And so he says, God, please remember, do something about them. Now, the reality was that by 539, the Edomim were no longer a factor in the politics, in the national tensions at that time. They were on and off, but they were not in charge. They had no strength at all because when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem in that period from 597 to 586, they also conquered the whole area where the Edomites were. And they basically destroyed their base as a nation. And they ceased to operate as a nation. When they were in Hebron, they were not a nation. They were a small group of people, leftovers. They were scattered all over the place. So by that time, and my thinking is, this guy, where was this guy during that period? The author was being taken into captivity into Bavel. In Bavel, do you think he knew at that point, with all of the tumult of being taken in, that he had any thoughts of the Edomites at that time? I'm saying no.
No.
Only until later on, when the Persians actually took over, that this guy now older in years, right? Older in years, not knowing what the fate of the Idumim or the Edomim were, he said he was hoping somebody take care of him, not knowing that they were already taken care of. But that's what was on his mind. It was festering. Imagine, if we're right, that he came in 586. We're now, how many years, 30 or 50 or so years later? This guy's an old guy, but he's been carrying this grudge all those years, and he had to let it out. And that's why it's there. And he put it in as part of the structure to link it to his remembering of Jerusalem. He's saying, this is what I remember of Jerusalem. Okay, it was my place. I will never forget it. And I'm never going to forget what happened to it when it fell. Now, he doesn't curse the Babylonians, because that's coming next. But he had to take care of that 50-year-old grudge. He had to get revenge. So he put it in here. That's what I think. And now, the wonderful conclusion. Now he's reacting to the fall of Babylon, to the Persians, without mentioning them. But here's what he says. Bat Bavel Hashduda. Bat Bavel. Right, daughter, fair of the Babylon. Devastated one. Ashrei Shiashalem Lach et Gemulech Shegamalt Lanu. Happy or blessed is he who repays you with the infliction of what you have inflicted upon us.
Us.
Now, what is that? Verse 9. Ashrei sheyachez v'nipetz et olalayich el hasala. Happy, a blessing on the one, or happy is the one who seizes and dashes your babies against the rock. In other words, that's what you did to us. It would be wonderful if somebody among the conquerors would do the same to your kids. Isn't that nice? Now, we have no record of indeed that's what happened when the Babylonians took Jerusalem. It could be, right? We cannot dismiss this. And if this guy actually saw that, right, then again, his memory going back 50 years, he wants that taken care of. It's very possible. The only evidence we have in the Bible of detailed destruction of life during the conquest of the Babylonians in Jerusalem is what? What's the source in the Bible with the details? We just read it the other day. Eicha, Lamentations.
Happened, yeah.
A very detailed picture of the destruction, of the famine, the thirst, the filth, the burning, and the killing of children. In chapters 2 and 4, it even says mothers cooked their children to eat them. Quote. It says like
Eicha.
In Eicha.
Eicha. Yeah. Chapters 2 and 4. It's right there. And all kinds of other great. The author of Eicha, whomever that was a very astute observer. and recorder of what went on, because the way he's describing it, it's everybody says this has got to be real. This is not made up.
Mm.
But the one thing that's missing is this. Now, it could be that this just fills in the picture, right? And it is the most gory. There's no indication by the mothers killed their children. The assumption is these are kids who had died of thirst or famine, and they cooked them and ate them.
Kalir has something like that too in one of the.
It was based on Eicha, no?
Yeah. Well, I think it was based probably on a pogrom at the same time.
Kalir?
Yeah.
Well, he's around, 600?
He wasn't that around, so he wasn't around 1,000.
No.
Not Kalir. So he was not involved. There were no Jewish pogroms in those days.
Oh.
Well, it hit me because it hit me because of October 7th.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's not only October 7th.
Yeah. Right. And by the way, it could be, if you think about it, that it's possible that it did happen. It doesn't mean that this was Babylonian conquest strategy. But, in these kinds of situations where you have soldiers in a frenzy of killing, they'll do almost anything if they're uncontrolled. And I don't know how controlled the generals and colonels of the Babylonian army had over all their troops. But if the troops were conglomerates that had a few, people from different places who had joined in some of the other countries, I don't know how their armies operated. But it's not impossible that in the heat of war, and something as central as that, in terms of the role that Jerusalem played for the Israelites, if you want to really shut them down, you'll do anything to shut them down. And it's that soldiers can get that message and just go out of, they lose control of them. And they do horrible things like this. So I don't know, and I can't comment, but it's possible.
Well, look, we have the example of what happened in the camps.
Yes, well, right. But the thing is, in the concentration camps, you're saying.
In the concentration camps and in other places too, even, people, when they're really back against the wall and they're dying of thirst and hunger. I mean, there was what was it called? Where pioneers crossed into northern, I believe it was
the Donner Party.
Yes, the Donner Party, exactly. Thanks, Barb. And there were reports of I don't know whether it's true or not, but there were reports of cannibalism there because they were caught in winter and they had no food.
Yeah.
Well, it was true. I'm positive that it was true.
Yeah. So
you have a kid who froze to death, right? A baby froze to death. You got no food. You cook them. I mean, that would be in Crimea. Not.
That's what happened.
Yeah. No. Yes, people get very desperate. They lose their own minds. But I wasn't talking about. I was talking about the smashing of the kids' heads. That's what I was thinking about. But right, it applies.
There are stories about the Second World War where people were trying to hide the fact that they had babies, that they smothered their babies.
Oh, yeah.
Purpose.
Yeah.
That they actually smothered them because they didn't want them to cry.
Yeah. But they didn't.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. But the truth is, it also depends upon how you train your soldiers. I guarantee you that the SS who ran the concentration camps, the death camps, right? I mean, they allowed the capos in these camps to get away with murder in terms of how the Jews were being dealt, right? The capos.
Well, the capos were Jew, weren't they?
Right. Yes, exactly. But they lost their bearings because of the pressures that they were under, right? And they didn't. I mean, they mistreated the Jews too. I'm not saying they broke skulls. But they were, when they would run those work details, they would run them to death. Because that was the whole purpose of a place like Auschwitz anyway. It was to kill Jews and squeeze some energy out of them before they died. And the whole purpose of it was to kill. And so when that happens, you say, oh, let's kill. And they, and for no reason, they could take a machine gun out and just shoot people down.
Well, these are Untermenschen, people who are not even human beings.
Right, exactly. They're animals. So what difference does it make anyway?
Right, that's what the Germans.
Well, you saw Schindler's List, which apparently is based on fact, right? And the colonel, the guy who ran the camp, remember his house was up on a hill.
Good.
He would take his gun out, for target practice, and kill Jews in the camp.
Oh yeah, and they forced mothers to throw their babies into a fire pit, and some mothers strangle their babies first.
Yeah.
I mean, that I know from working with survivors.
Right, and there you're dealing with highly trained SS people.
Well, they were trying to kill. I mean,
exactly. Right. But they were convinced they saw these creatures that looked like humans, but they weren't humans. In their eyes, they were animals. I can do with them the same thing. I go hunting. I can kill this. I can kill a rabbit. I'll kill a Jew.
Yeah.
That's how their minds were
right. And I'm sure that's exactly the minds of the people who drove the Jews out of Jerusalem and into Babylon. They didn't say, "Please, would you mind taking a little?"
It could be.
We have a real good deal at the Hilton.
Yeah, I don't think we know enough. There's not enough details about that, but
yeah,
possible, sure. All right. Anyway, so this is the psalm, all right, and you can see the emotions. I just made a note here. It's filled with emotions. Right? You got anger, you got resentment, you got hope, you got loyalty, revenge, right? All these different feelings that are surrounded here, and you wonder if you look at Jews who survived the Holocaust, right, what are the emotions that they carry with them?
Oh,
it's a mix. It's a huge mix. You've got
sorrow, guilt,
who are grateful for being survived. There are those who feel guilty that they survived. There are people who are, Jews. A lot of the Jews came out of Poland and survived. Don't consider the Poles to be people because they treated the Jews like the Jews were animals, and in their minds, the Poles, they're almost like not human.
Yeah.
A reverse response on that. And you understand that, okay? And so this guy, I'm talking now about the Levite who wrote this. He's experienced all that stuff.
And there is a progression here from beginning to end.
Yes.
And the progression goes from acceptance of being in jail to anger and then rage.
Yeah. In a sense, yes.
I think it was not acceptance, though. I think it was an unimaginable sorrow and grief.
That was part of it. But I think what you see at the very beginning, though, is a little bit of chutzpah on their part. In other words, when they say we're not going to sing those songs you want to hear,
right?
That they're saying that's crossing a line, and it's almost if you can do whatever you want. We're not going to do that. And I don't know. Again, that's in Babylon, not at the site of the battle, right? They're already there. They're under control, right? And as I said later, that eventually the Jews lived there in Babylon, in Babylonia, relatively peacefully until the Persians came. And then, that's why most of them stayed. You realize the vast majority, as far as we can determine, the vast majority of the Jews stayed in Babylonia because they had it good. The Persians were tolerant. By that point, the Babylonians had softened up, and then they were gone. And, things were okay. And they knew that the schlep back would be long, and they knew that what they were going back to was a destroyed Judah. They would have to basically rebuild. And it took a long time. That went through a lot of phases We assume when you think of Jerusalem and environment, when these people came back to Judea, what came to be known as Judea, but then it was called Yahud, right? In Aramaic, Yahud. That's why they are Yahudim or Yehudim. That's where it comes from, because it was Judah, right? It was Shevet Yehudah. And that the southern kingdom was called Yehudah, northern kingdom was Yisrael. All right, so they were in Yehudah, in Yahud, right? And you think, they're coming back, and they had this image, this expansive country from, just south of Beit El, all the way down to Arad and Beersheba, with land that even has some land on the other side of the Jordan, in the southern parts there, or, wherever they did conquer some land over there, of what is today Jordan. No. Yahud was Jerusalem and its environs. I don't know how many kilometers out. That's where they lived. Because the rest of the whole area was these crypto Jews who had left there, who were not taken into exile, who, according to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, assimilated, and they had these mixtures of things. And the closest you had to Jews were the Samaritans, the Shomronim, right, who had their own versions of the Torah, had their own idea how things were going to go. And the guys who came back from the exile wanted nothing to do with them, because they wanted to create a pure monotheistic, according to the book of Deuteronomy, and then the rest of Sefer Torah, built on all of those traditions, a monotheistic religion in Jerusalem with the temple. That's what they wanted. And they didn't want anybody else involved. And when the priests, the children of the priests in the 5th century had intermarried with the daughters of the surrounding population, right? The term I use with these crypto Jews, what was the ruling that Nehemiah came down with? Kick out the women. Get rid of them. You cannot have them in our midst, because they will be a path into idolatry, and we will go back into exile. And so they got rid of the women. And it wasn't, the irony is that they spend most time in the text, they're talking about the priestly families that did it, the Kohanim. Okay? They said you must retain your religious purity, if you will, your racial purity. And they did. But it limited their power. And only after Jerusalem got its upgrade and Judah became a serious, shall we say, appendix to the empire in terms of controlling Egypt, they needed to keep the Jews on their side. And it's interesting because eventually what happened after the Greeks conquered the Persian Empire, and then what happened was the Kohanim in Jerusalem, I'm talking after 300, right, during the course of the 3rd and 2nd centuries, they created relationships with the ruling powers of the Greek Empire, of which they had been a part. At first, it was the Egyptians, they controlled the Egyptian Greeks. Then it was the northern Greeks, and then it was the Egyptians again. So, I mean, that went back and forth depending upon the power struggle between the Greeks, the Greek Syrians, and the Greek Egyptians. So the Jews always tried to stay on the winning side over there. But then you end up, of course, with the Tzeduki, with the priests of Beit Sadok becoming corrupted. And that led to the Maccabean revolt. It was part of the factors that led into that revolt. So that's it. All right. We're done. It's 9 o'clock. Wait, next week, I want to do 2 things. One, we will focus on Psalm 150. It's very brief. But before we do that, that will be the parperet, right? That's the dessert. Because it's a lovely little, beautiful pudding. That's very lovely. Okay? And we can sing it together. All right. But I want you to please look at, just read,
150.
peruse, Psalms 147 and 149, because that would be phase 2 of Psalm 137. You'll see.
All right. You have 147.
147 and 149.
147.
But not 148.
Correct. That's change of subject.
Part of the daily liturgy.
What?
47.
Part of the regular Jewish morning liturgy.
Of course.
147 and 149. And then
so just look them over. We're not going to have a detailed thing. I just want you to see, though, that would be the next stage of what happened in Jerusalem. And it's obviously a later stage. All right. So Yesher Koach. Thank you, everybody.
Yesher Koach.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.